right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Need Some Introduction. Today's episode primarily will be discussing the latest episode of House of the Dragon, the fourth episode, King of the Narrow Sea, and this one is directed by Claire Kilner, and she will also be directing next week's episode. I do like to call out the creative team behind these individual episodes, especially when I'm a fan of these episodes, and I am a fan of this episode, but I want to get Celia's feedback.
Hello there.
On not only this episode, but last week's episode too. So we'll be breaking down this week's episode after we discuss last week's episode briefly. I wasn't able to catch up with her on that one. And also just a reminder that make sure you subscribe to get our episodes. We continue to cover the show The Patient on Hulu. And Sona and I are not loving that show. But I have a special guest. I have a psychologist coming on to discuss the show next week. And she wants to come on the show because she finds the show very compelling, because she understands from a psychological perspective what's happening to these characters. She has a very interesting interpretation, which makes me appreciate the show a little bit more. So I'll have her on next week. So may stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, by the way, there are so many thrillers coming out this month, and not just like kind of run-of-the-mill garbage thrillers. These are high profile, very well reviewed thrillers. And I have suggested one older one in this past week, but I will probably have to have a bonus episode with you, Celia, where I'll run down a whole bunch of recent thrillers that I recommend, and maybe you can pick one to watch and we can discuss it. And that will continue all the way through Halloween. I mean, I've been looking at the release schedule, and there are so many horror movies and thrillers coming out, and a lot of these are very high profile, considered very good films. So I'm looking forward to that. I do like a good thriller. I do like a good horror movie.
I saw a horror movie this weekend.
Oh, which one? Barbarian?
Yes, it was good.
You can't spoil it for me because I'm planning to see it sometime this week. So, but we can discuss it. Maybe that's what we discuss later in the week.
Okay.
All right, cool. We'll save it for then. Once I watch it, I'll announce it so we can, and then since you've already seen it, hey, we can talk about it.
My crown and the stepstones are yours.
Where is Lord Corlys?
He sailed home to Driftmark.
Who holds the stepstones?
The tides, the crabs, and 2,000 dead Triarchy corsairs staked to the sand to warn those who might follow.
Rise.
All right. So before we get into this current episode, I wanted to get your read on last week's episode. How'd you feel about it?
I liked last week's episode. It moved everything along really well. There was a little wit about there. There's a couple of things going on, and that one delved deeply into it. Just like this episode delved again really deeply into why women have to have children and sex and desire and that chess game of power. It was very sex related this weekend.
Yeah, all the aspects of it, marriage as well as sex, for sure.
Yes, and duty.
Yep.
And having intercourse with a very scabby old men.
Yeah, you got to do it for the kingdom.
Very scabby.
Do it for the realm. Do it for the realm.
Bleeding sores. So hot.
Yeah, we'll get to all of that. I've very much been enjoying the show. I think the reason I like the show so much, and especially this week, kind of crystallized it in my mind after last week, which I also very much liked, is that the show, because it jumps through time, and I was critical at the beginning, like, where is the Tyrion character? Where is that, more flamboyant, playful character, so we can kind of luxuriate in the show? And I've heard some negative commentary about how it really feels like it's kind of like a historical drama of some kind, rather than they want it to be Game of Thrones again. And I honestly had some of that same expectation. But I think I came around on this episode this week exactly for the reasons you just said, that what I find interesting about the show, especially because they're like literally jumping to another 2 years in time in this current episode, and then we're going to jump 15 years in time in 2 or 3 more episodes, and that's when we have these other cast members coming and joining the show. It's almost like I'm watching a movie, which I really appreciate the fact that it's a self-contained movie, like story, that is about something thematically. Like you said last week, it was about the torment of the king and the decisions he had to make, and did he make those right decisions? You see the irony of him killing this stag in this embarrassing way while his daughter actually does encounter the white stag and does not kill it, right? So all these things kind of are self-contained in an episode. And now and then after that, you jump ahead a couple more years. And now, like you said, it's about the role of women in society, the way sex is a weapon and a tool in the society, right? And once again, that is the theme of this particular episode. And I appreciate it because I empathize with these characters, surprisingly, because it is the situation that they're in that I'm empathizing with, rather than traditionally more like plot-driven shows where you're caught up in a particular character's storyline. And maybe you like one character more than the other. I end up like feeling sympathy for all these characters because I just empathize with the situation they're in. And I personally, I think that's another reason that this works for me. I really do gravitate towards stories about history. We have this tendency to try to write history as this, this great man story, this, this hero rose and yada, 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 when really history is really messy and it's a lot of like infighting and people make wrong mistakes that sometimes turn out to be right or make the right decision and it turns out to be wrong. And it's all this complexity and ugliness. And it's usually caught up in your own personal dramas. And that's really what this whole entire show is about. And I really have been enjoying that about it.
I think everything is very well explained. And then they have these interesting things happening behind them.
Yeah.
I love the scene where she has to pick a husband.
Yes.
And this little boy is like, oh, no, you'll never have to worry. Like, I'm the one. And you're kind of underestimating this side character.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. And all of a sudden, something happens and he becomes very important. I don't know yet if it's by concept or if he's coming back in some way, but he was a memorable character along the lines of the storytelling that they have going on. I have to say, you know what I'm going to bring up. I do not think he's her dad.
Oh, no.
Anymore.
No.
I'm like, oh, yeah, I was reading it in a different way.
I had disposed of that theory before, but absolutely, yeah. So let's get into it. That's actually a good starting point that you brought up with that young knight or prince, I guess, who, ends up, getting mocked by this much bigger guy. And the princess seems to be, laughing at this guy and kind of taking the jester's perspective and being like, haha, yeah, this little guy. And of course, like you mentioned, he ends up killing that older kid. And maybe you're right. Maybe when they jump forward in time, we'll see this person again recast. The context of that is that she apparently has been out. She was supposed to be out for many more months, but she kind of cut this trip short. She's probably been out 4 months being presented all of these possible suitors. And she decides to head back home a little bit early because she is not enjoying this process. And on the way back home, I think importantly, first of all, she is still making a little bit of goo-goo eyes at Crystal, her knight, her protector. And secondly, while she's on the boat, her uncle swoops down and kind of wings the boat as he flies by, just to be a little bit more of a jerk on top of everything else. Speaking of Goo eyes, she seems a little flushed, like, ooh, Damon has arrived. Like she's a little bit flustered, even early in the episode.
I think she's always kind of admired him, but I don't know if she has come to the realization that maybe it's like sexual attraction to her own uncle, because it was the norm back then. This was not that unheard of. I mean, it sounds really
especially among the Targaryens, by the way, especially specifically in this storyline. Yeah.
So this would not be completely out of the realm of possibility at all. And she is feeling him. Yeah.
And to that point, once they arrive and they're having this ceremony, a big ceremony, because this is the return 2 years. This is 2 years after the last episode we just saw. They've continued to like wipe out the rest of the crabs from these islands and have, done the same thing to them. Of course, this is how Damon works. He has now, crucified them to the beach to like as a warning for anybody else to not step out of line. And we also find out that the sea snake has basically not come back into the fold, and he may actually be aligning himself with one of the families from Bravo. So that's like that's the bank, basically. So the bank and the fleet. So that is obviously a significant threat to the power of the king. But Damon has come back to make amends, at least appears to be the case, with his brother. His brother's happy to have him back. They're palling around and shunning the women, by the way, even not only his daughter, who he's kind of mad because she cut this trip short, but also Allison feels very lonely and has been kind of neglected by her husband now, especially now that the boys are back in town. But beyond that is the fact that she's also been very much missing Alicent because, everybody else is just now a servant, afraid to say anything around her. She can't get counsel from anybody. Her dad obviously is always trying to pressure her into getting the grandson made into the next heir to the throne. And she just feels like manipulated constantly and used by her husband as well. And yeah, so I feel really, really bad for Alicent here.
Me too, but she has no other options. This is literally the only thing she can do. So she's going to be pretty lonely. I keep waiting for her to snap and just do something really off the cuff. I keep waiting for her to just lose it.
Interestingly, we have Alicent having that conversation with Rhaenyra. They have a really great scene where she talks about some of the themes you were just talking about earlier. Women, have limited options when it comes to what they can do, as queens. And, you see both sides of the argument where Rhaenyra is like saying like, I don't really want to have this life. But then Alicent goes, oh, how sad it is for you. Like, like most people have one or two people they can possibly marry. You have like dozens of people fighting over you. But at the same time, Rhaenyra says something very offensive to Alicent accidentally.
Surmise the tour did not go well? I endured it for as long as I could. Have every young knight and lord in the 7 kingdoms fawning over you. What misery. 'Tis rare for girls in this realm to get a choice between 2 suitors, no less 2 score of them. Those men and boys don't fawn over me. They only want my name and my Valyrian blood for their offspring. I think it's rather romantic. How romantic it must be to get imprisoned in a castle and me to squeeze out heirs.
Of course, that is exactly the position that Alicent is in. And then, of course, another important scene that comes almost right after that, which is where we see Rhaenyra meet up with Daemon under, by the way, did you notice that they meet? There's been multiple scenes here where they're under the weirwood outside of King's Landing. And in Game of Thrones, there are no weirwoods outside of the north. All of them are gone except for the ones in the north. So it's interesting that we see one right here in the God's Wood outside of King's Landing, which means that at some point, probably in the course of the series, that tree is going to be burned to the ground, most likely. And she meets up with Daemon there. He notices right away that she's still wearing his necklace, even though they haven't seen each other in 4 years. Well, he hasn't been to the kingdom in 4 years, but they have actually seen each other because of that confrontation last week or 2 weeks ago. She's still longing for him. And as a matter of fact, when he enters, she is like a giddy little schoolgirl. Like, he enters back when he has his meeting with the king in front of the court. And they have this interesting conversation where they talk about marriage. Like, what does marriage mean to a man? Because he's like saying, hey, you can do what you want after you get married. And she says, well, not necessarily if you're a woman. There's like certain decorum that women still have to abide by. And so it's interesting to have them have these two very different perspectives on marriage. She calls it like a death sentence, basically. And he says to her, you shouldn't enjoy the best parts of life because you fear the worst parts of it. And she says it's not fear that she seeks, it's solitude. So she really just wants to be alone, which is something that obviously as this princess and definitely as queen, she would never be able to be.
Initially, I thought that Daemon had just taken her out into the city so that she could see in reality what was happening. So she wouldn't just be living in a fantasy land up there in the sky in her tower. But he's so sneaky.
Yeah.
He knew what he was doing.
Yeah. I have a question for you, though. So what you're alluding to there is that she later on heads back to her quarters. She finds a sack with some clothes that makes her look like just a page boy. And she puts on the costume. And there's also a little map showing that behind the bed, if she moves the bed, there's like a secret passageway that she can escape through. And when she follows the map, she runs into Daemon and he takes her out to eat and cajole and importantly see a performance where she gets a feel for the crowd not being a big fan of her becoming the queen in the future, by the way. And of course, they're having some kind of carnival or something. And what did you think about that, her reaction where he basically says, hey, I just want to let you know, if you become queen, you might have to go to war with your people. And she basically says, I don't care. It's not their decision. So I'm not sure if that's the right kind of leadership.
Well, that's the wrong decision, clearly. But she also comes off like a bratty child.
Yeah, which she is. Right? She's about
she is a
18
bratty
now.
child. Yeah. And she's been sheltered. It's not that it's appropriate. I just don't find it surprising. I'm like, yeah, of course she would think that. She's not like very mature yet either. This Targaryen world is kind of doomed. I feel like Daemon should just be king. Wouldn't he just be better? He would terrify people for a while, but they'd listen to him.
His decisions are purely not only in his own self-interest, they are completely selfish, but also not thought out. Like you think about all of the actions we've seen. For example, in last week's episode, we got to see 3 different forms of leadership, right? So let's go back to that thematically. We see that she seems to be the person who's willing to resort to violence when she has to. But other than that, she doesn't see violence for the sake of violence at all. And as a matter of fact, even though she could potentially, kill the white stag and bring it back and say, look, this is like a sign that I found, not my father. It could be a way to strengthen her position. She thinks it's a waste to kill this stag. On the other hand, the dad is desperately not only trying to cling to any symbol that makes him feel like his decision is right, he's completely conflicted. He literally says at one point, I can't make the decision that makes everyone happy, which obviously is an impossibility. You cannot make a decision that makes everybody happy. And then lastly, we also see Damon last week where his brother's like, finally, brother, I'm coming. Reinforcements are on the way, and he goes like on a suicide mission to try to get the crab, and it worked out for him, don't get me wrong, but I'm not sure if that is a good model of leadership. He could have waited for reinforcements and not risked his life to make a suicide run when he could have just waited. He's been waiting for years. He could wait a few months longer until the cavalry arrives with multiple dragons, etc. Like it's a stupid decision he makes there at the end of last week's episode. All that is to say, not sure he's the best leader in the bunch.
We could always just be like, okay, crab guy. Can you imagine that?
How about the baby
That
though?
would
Maybe
be
the baby. We don't know what
horrifying.
the baby's leadership skills are. So we've only seen him
He's
playing with
falling apart though. The king is not going to
the
make
baby.
it. I know, but he'd have to. This baby is really young right now, and this king is falling apart. Like he's losing body parts. So
Well,
they better make a decision pretty quickly.
But think about Game of Thrones, right? Where you had Joffrey in power and his mom was really pulling the strings. But of course, Joffrey had something to say about that too. But I mean, it's not like in real historical terms, there hasn't been, children who are princes and kings because of their lineage. And then, of course, really behind the scenes, someone's pulling those strings, right? So that's part of the reason that maybe someone's pushing for the baby. Otto, for example, could push for the child. And then via his daughter, he can actually be pulling the strings of power. I am assuming that the word is going to get out of how sick he really is. He can, like you mentioned already, you alluded to it, he's continuously rotting away a little bit more and more every time we see him.
Oh my gosh, it's not slow either. Like these are like gaping open sores.
Well, think about it. The beginning of the very first scene of the very first episode, maybe not the first scene because we had that little preamble, but the first time we meet the king in the first episode, they're tending this wound that won't close. And then at the end of the second episode is when he cuts his finger and when he's like confronting his brother. And in the next episode, he lost the finger, then he lost 2 fingers. Now he's got those sores all over himself. So this is all happening over the course of 4 years. So it is not happening in a week, but you would assume if this is happening systemically in another 4 years, he's probably going to be in really, really bad shape, right? So inevitably,
poor guy.
Yes.
I started feeling sorry for him in this one. I mean,
last week too.
Is not an idiot though. He's just constantly always in denial. Yeah. Maybe he knows how bad things really are and he can't face it. He's not that strong because he understands why he has to fire his hands. And right. I agree with him, actually. You would think like, no, why did he fire him? The guy was just telling him the truth.
Right.
Someone has to do that. But this guy had set people to spy on the princess.
This is something
looking for dirt.
Yes. Yep. This is the very interesting thing. I think what I loved about this episode in retrospect, after I watched it, I rewatched some scenes to take some notes. And what I loved about this the second time around, even more impressive than I was with originally watching it, is that every single character in this episode tells the truth and tells a lie at the same time. And it's fantastic. You see that the princess says that she did not sleep with Damon. True, right? But it's not that she did not want to. She would have if he had performed at the time. You have that Damon is pushing things with her and he wanted to, right? So when he goes to the brother and says that they did consummate the relationship, which was a lie, right? it's a lie what he said to the king, but it's not that he didn't want to. At least in theory, he didn't want to. But then when push came to shove at that moment, when she actually was into it, I think maybe he thought that this was all a game and she wouldn't be into it. So then she was into it, but he was into it too. But then at some moment, he's just like, I can't do this for real. Like I can't actually do this. Right. So I think that's what
But
kind
he
of,
seems to have problems performing in general. A lot of the times he's sitting around brothels and he's not performing. And there was that first episode where he couldn't perform.
well, in that case,
And
in that case, he couldn't finish. In this case, he couldn't, do anything. But I
yeah,
think there's a good reason. There's a good reason for it in this case. That he's probably very
he's a
tortured.
complicated guy. I don't know
Yes.
how tormented he is. He seemed pretty deliberate. He just looked annoyed that he couldn't get it up. That's what I got. He was like, damn it.
Yeah, but I'm saying
I feel like he was frustrated that he couldn't do it.
yes, I agree that he's frustrated. He wanted to follow through. I totally agree. But I'm saying that deep down inside, that maybe the thing that made him not able to perform was that, he has some consciousness there, no matter, regardless of what his intentions were initially. I think that, at some point his conscience, kind of got to him in the same way, by the way, if you want to talk about the sexual performance, in the same way that he couldn't, finish in that first episode because he was, his mind was somewhere else. And, Miss Sarah knew that as well, that it's the same thing. He acts like, oh, what my brother said to me today didn't bother me, but it did. He's probably thinking about it constantly. So in a way, he lies to himself, as does the king, by the way. So speaking of people who are in self-denial, the king basically, he first accuses the daughter, that, the daughter lies to him. He talks to the brother lies to him in a different way. He confronts Otto, by the way, speaking of being conflicted and lying and not and telling the truth at the same time, is he feels terrible having to tell the king this thing, but he knows that it's good for him because he wants his grandson to be the heir to the throne. But he knows that he's endangering himself also. But like you mentioned, he was paying to have her followed around. So the king is absolutely right to be like, yes, you were right, but you were having her spied on. And of course, the icing on the cake of this whole entire episode, and we're jumping around here, but it's at the very conclusion where he supposedly believes his daughter and fires Otto to maintain the relationship with her, and then still has her have her special tea brewed to make sure that any unwanted consequences are purged out, which she may need, not because she had sex with Damon, because she had sex with Crystal.
When he fired his hands, I understood that, or at least I think that's what was happening. He had to fire him. You can't be allowed to do what he did to the heir of the throne. You can't do that. I felt like it was almost like an HR decision.
Right. He's doing it for a couple of reasons there. There's a lot of political maneuvering here also. Part of it is the fact that Rhaenyra is saying, I will marry the prince. So finally, he's making this marriage, which we preview in the upcoming episode. So that is going to obviously fortify the family's position in a couple of different ways. But her agreement is, I'll do that if you get rid of Otto, which of course is circling all the way back to, you feel like at some point Alicent is going to like snap and not be able to take it anymore. When she finds out that her dad was removed as hand, if she continues to hook up with Crystal, let's say, for example, and she finds out that she lied about that night and got her father kicked out, that is going to create a huge rift in their friendship, I think.
And there's a lot of more unethical things happening. She is not supposed to seduce that night.
Oh yeah,
I don't even think he's not allowed to.
Yeah, he takes a vow of chastity.
I believe.
Yes.
Yep. Oh, yeah. So there's that.
Yeah.
She's just a bad girl.
She was a very bad girl this week. Yeah,
she's
exactly.
very bad.
The baptism of blood she had last week, killing that that boar. It's, this is her transformation now in this week, because you're right. She has awakened the Daemon side of her personality, basically.
She's very emboldened.
Yeah.
And now she's all sexually ravenous.
Yeah.
So she is going to start turning a little more primal as we watch this show, which is great, because aren't the Targaryens primal?
Not always, but I mean, they were. I mean, this is interesting that this story is picking up here, because the book that this is based on, which is just a history of the Targaryen family, actually goes back almost 100 years earlier. And they allude to it here, that his grandfather was killed after just 6 days of, being the hand. And that's how Otto got into his position. this was Targaryens killing Targaryens, right? So this is a very violent period of time where the Targaryens have killed each other off to continuously fight for the throne, control the throne. And now this has been a peaceful kingdom under this reign with Viserys. Although we still see, multiple times now, especially as he seems to be falling apart physically and maybe mentally as well, that, we do see that anger and that, potentially that madness coming through. You see how he threatened the Lannister guy last week. That was actually a really interesting scene. So you see some of that venom might be coming out. And so that's to speak that, in the preview, it looks like there is civil war coming. And maybe it is, Daemon, the faction for Daemon's succession, the faction for, we haven't even touched on that though, but he now has some loyalty. People are calling him the king of the Narrow Sea. So that's obviously a slap in the face of the king, of course. And, is it going to be Rhaenyra? Is it going to be the prince?
Well, we shall see. I
Indeed.
think that I think that we're going to find out through a lot of trials and tribulations here. But these are interesting characters. Remember when I was like, oh, I just want to fall in love with these characters.
Yeah.
I see a possibility of that now because they're interesting to me. So I'm pretty happy with this week.
I felt empathy for every single character. I thought I think that they did a really good job of building that out. Okay, a couple of questions I have for you. One is, the first one is, I think it's interesting that, I think they intentionally, as a matter of fact, if you see that little, there's like a 5-minute making of episode featurette that comes out at the end of the episode, they talk to the director. They talk to, what's her name? Claire Kilner. And she talks about how she wanted to shoot these sex scenes in a way that, traditionally, like Kim, my wife, always makes fun of the fact that in all these movies, Game of Thrones and everything, it's always like the sex scenes are always like, like quickly, they're like pulling down their pants really quick and then thrust. That's the sex scene, right? And every single time, that's what it is. And I have to say
or you could watch like Spartacus, where it's just like these women are like, oh gosh,
yeah, exactly,
kill me now, and then like they just sit there and they take it.
Oh my God, Spartacus! Yeah, Spartacus
is take it for hours.
Yes, Spartacus is hilarious. They're just like pin cushions; they could just take it forever, right? But
it's
anyway,
crazy.
I did want to talk about the two sex scenes here because I thought there was, I don't know if you want to call it a female perspective, although there probably was that. I also just thought it was very sensual. Like, I really think that, once again, maybe just speaking to the fact that we need more diversity in directing, I thought it was really sensual the way that, she undresses the knight. Like, he's in this armor, like there's a lot to do. And they made the whole undressing this, part of the seduction. I thought it was really, really well done. And this in the scene between Rhaenyra and her uncle too, like the power goes back and forth between the two of them. And it's really just a kissing scene, but it says so much about their character. Once again, not the traditional thrust.
Not just a kissing scene. He has her pushed up against the wall.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
He's like feeling her up.
Oh, no, when I'm saying the kissing scene, I'm saying that most of that dynamic shift between the two of them, that the taking of power back and forth between the two of them, is done with their kissing, right? Like, that's where you see most of that. Beyond the, yes, he does have her against the wall. They are disrobing at that moment. So it's not just.
I love that only... she's in control of this, though. Yeah, like, she's going for this, you know? She just decided this is it. She's just going to do this right now. So impulsive.
Yeah, exactly. In a way, you can see how this is maybe her taking control of the situation, not only in acting like one of the guys, she knows what Daemon and her father did in the past. She knew how it used to be for the guys. They can do whatever the hell they want. But I think in a way, if this comes out that she's now no longer a maiden and she's no longer marriageable, it kind of gets her out of the circumstance once again, right? And it's something that she can't escape, but she can at least fantasize that she can. Because when push comes to shove, by the way, she lies to, preserve her virginity, supposedly, in the eyes of these suitors, so that she is still marriageable. So, she could have just said it's all true, and that would have been it. Like, she would no longer be the heir. It would go to her brother, and she's done with that, right? But she wants both things at the same time. She wants everything at the same time. And I mean, who doesn't, right? Like, this is a great opportunity for her, but, this was kind of her being rebellious and potentially could have blown up in her face, but it all worked out for the best.
And
really.
Drunk on her own power. She's drunk on her power.
Yeah. And I mean, and Damon is playing her too, right? Damon is getting her drunk. He's getting her, and then he's leading her down this rabbit hole. But of course, she knows Damon has his own intentions, and she knows she's attracted to Damon. So all of this is decisions she's making to put herself into this circumstance, right? So, but she does, like you said, I think she takes the power back by the end of this. She's not a victim of it at all by the end. All right. The other question I have for you is we do see very importantly here, by the way, I have not read the books, but this whole idea of the white worm is apparently very important to things to come in the future. Turns out the white worm is Masseria, who has broken up with Damon. She's back in the city. She's not at the brothel. She's running the little sparrows around, these little spy. She's running the spy network, basically, which was also existed back in Game of Thrones, by the way. So I don't know if this is the origin of it or if she just kind of picked it up where, just became the dominant force in there. But he crashes with her. And very importantly, when this spy goes and tells Otto what he saw, he comes back with the payment from Otto. And who receives it? It's Masera, right? My question is Masera manipulating these people, or is she simply the conduit for information? And this is just information, so she'll sell it to whoever wants it. And lastly, was Damon aware of this? Was he part of this at all? I don't think so, right?
I don't think that Damon knew about this.
No.
But I feel like it's a little bit more than, I mean, she's very independent. She wants to be independent. She wants to feel safe. So if she can manipulate this, I feel like she would do that, knowing her character. I don't think Damon has any idea. I don't know if he would stand for this.
Yeah, given the interactions they have the next morning, he seems to not have been aware of what was happening. Like he wasn't part of like a setup for the princess. Because it doesn't help him really either. It doesn't really help his standing either in this whole situation.
Plus, he couldn't really, I mean, it's embarrassing for him.
Yeah.
It doesn't make him look good.
All right. Another question I have for you. When he is finally confronted by his brother and Viserys questions him and he says, what was your intention here? Like, where did you think this was going to get you? And he could have just been like, oh, I just want to mess with your head. As a matter of fact, Allison says something very insightful because the king says the same thing. Why would he do this? So how does this help him in any way? And Allison says that if it makes you smaller, it props him up, which I think there is an element of this where he's just a troll. He's always messing with his brother, regardless if he was younger, that he was the better choice for king. I think he always has that chip on his shoulder. But do you think when he said, I want to marry Rhaenyra, I mean, is it just something he's just saying? Does he kind of believe it? Does he really want that?
Well, I don't know if he wants to marry her. She would be like a lot of work. The two of them married to each other when she's supposed to be the heir. If he turns out to be the heir, I mean, I don't know. It's too much. Is he trying to make her? She would have to be so in love with him,
right? So
head over heels that she would do anything he wanted, and she would think this is a great idea. And it's like, we are a team. But that is not how she's coming off to me. I feel like she would not want to share that much power.
So like in an ideal world, do you believe he would want it? Or do you think
I feel like in an ideal world, they would get together because it was good politically. They don't necessarily have to get married. They might even have an open marriage in there if nobody knew about it, even though they'd be loyal to each other. That's ideally where he would go, I think.
I do want to call out one last thing, as I did want to, like you mentioned earlier, when the king does dispose of Otto as his hand, his face, I mean, what a great performance he gives there. Like that moment where he's like, he's just so crestfallen because he did tell the truth. But in other words, even when he was telling the king, he took no pleasure in this. When he heard the news, he's like, oh my God, I'm going to have to tell him. He felt horrible about it.
I apologize for the early hour, Your Grace. I have discomforting news. I thought it best shared discreetly before the council convenes.
Fuck the sea snake.
I'm afraid it concerns the princess, my king.
Has she been harmed?
It is no easy thing to tell a father of his daughter's exploits. I had considered saying nothing, but...
What has she done?
The princess was spied last evening. Beyond the walls of the keep. In a pleasure house.
What of it?
She was carrying on with her uncle, they were engaged in behaviors unbecoming of a maiden, of a princess.
What behaviors?
What must I say, at your grace?
You enter my bedchamber, accusing my daughter of something. Now speak it plainly.
And then when it blows up in his face, he was just so crestfallen there in that final moment. I just want to call out that it was a really great performance. Actually, everybody just gives great performances in this show, I think, across the board. So
I feel like the king is not that, I don't know how to describe this man. He's weak, but he's not weak.
right.
Like he will do what he has to do if it really comes down to it.
Yeah.
He's just extremely non-violent.
I think he's conflicted. I think we've seen multiple times, especially in the recent episodes, when he feels cornered or when he feels pressured, he does become assertive and maybe not even making the best decisions, but at least is assertive. As a matter of fact, it's probably reactionary, like that time he wanted to like fly out to the island, when it's like the king without an heir cannot just fly out to an island in the middle, like it's way too dangerous. So he's probably not always rational about what he's saying, but so there is some of that Targaryen brutality in his potential behavior. But I think that he has inherited a peaceful land and he just deep down inside wants this to be a peaceful reign for him. But speaking of that, we see previews for next week where we see a wedding. So it does look like Rhaenyra is going through with her commitment to marry. But we also see the beginning of, we see a lot of violence here too. So there is some signs of maybe a civil war, and also hinted at there that Viserys is sicker. And I think news gets out that Viserys is sick. And of course, once that news starts to spread, people are going to start aligning behind these different factions. And I think that a lot of this, I think maybe the first, 5-6 episodes of the season, maybe 5, because it'll split the season in half, is really just setting up whatever the dynamic is going to be for the second half of this season of the show, which is going to be whoever is going to win this immediate succession. That's my guess as to what we're going to see.
I love it. It's like a play.
Yeah.
It's got that meandering pace. I mean that in a good way.
Yeah, I feel lived in. The only thing I could be critical of is, I sometimes feel like it's kind of trapped inside that castle, but we're really following the people inside the castle. That's the storyline. We don't have, once again, I've heard criticism that people want it to be like, what's happening in Westeros? I'm like, this is not what this show's about. This is not Game of Thrones. Or I should say, maybe it is Game of Thrones, but the succession is not 5 kings in 5 realms of the countryside. It's these 3 or 4 possible
That's why it
heirs.
presents like a play.
Yeah. Like Macbeth.
Yeah, that's really great. It's very artsy.
Jaehaerys would have disinherited you.
For a lie? You've yet to ask me for the truth of what happened.
The truth does not matter, Rhaenyra. Only perception. You have exposed yourself. Now we must both suffer the consequences.
Were I born a man, I could bear 2 men if I wanted. I could father a dozen bastards, and no one in your court would blink an eye.
You're right. But you were born a woman.
So you'll strip me of my titles and name Aegon in my stead.
I would. But it is mine to hold the realm together, not sow it with further division. Your courtship is at an end. You will wed Selena Velaryon, and you will do so without protest.
The son of the sea snake. So I can be a remedy for your political headaches.
You are my political headache.
I think that's about it. Anything else you've been watching? Oh, I wanted a couple of announcements for the week. It's things I'll probably be watching. I don't know how I'll be able to fit it into the show. There's way too much to watch. But this week, there's a slew of new things coming. It's September, and after a relatively quiet summer, many things coming back. And 2 things this week. There's so many things. It's like weekly, there's going to be stuff coming back.
I can't wait.
Atlanta season 4 is coming. This is the final season of Atlanta. So that's coming this week.
Nice. Okay. I'm excited.
And
Atlanta's so funny.
yeah. Although season 3, I don't know if you watched season 3. It
was like a horror movie, but weird. It was funny.
The weird season of, and I definitely want to talk about season 3 of Atlanta, which had those kind of weird anthology episodes. They have a very ambitious plan for the ending, so we'll have to see how it plays out. And Also, of course, your favorite show, or one of your favorite shows, The Handmaid's Tale, is coming back
I can't wait.
this week. Yeah.
Just can't wait. Have you caught up?
No, not even close. I'm on episode 4.
It is very hard to watch.
Yes,
So I don't know if you're going to make it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm on episode 4 of the first season. So way behind. So, and this is season 5, right? But they have renewed it for season 6, which will be the last season. Which I mean, that's just way too many. I think I honestly I feel I have to tap out. Just 6 seasons of this, I can't imagine.
I'm so excited.
Yeah, and that is a very popular show, obviously, and we'll be back this week as well. And Goodnight Mommy, the remake with Naomi Watts, is coming out this weekend, and maybe we can watch that and we'll talk about that. Maybe we'll have a separate episode where we can talk about Barbarian and Goodnight Mommy. We'll talk about both those things.
That would be great. Andrew loves that movie, the original.
Yeah, which I've never seen, believe it or not. I've only seen parts of it. I've never seen the whole thing. Yeah, we'll get to see how the remake goes. By the way, speaking of remakes, interesting, Naomi Watts is remaking this movie, a very popular or very famous foreign film. And by the way, she was also the star of the American remake of Funny Games, which was, I thought, a really good remake of that. Completely unnecessary, but a very good remake of that movie anyway.
Yeah, it was really good. I was surprised. It was almost exactly like the original.
You know what? It was the same director, and he, I think he used the same shot list. So there's very few differences.
It really was very differences. Similar.
Yeah. That's a Michael Haneke, who's every one of his movies are so unbelievably brutal. Maybe that one of the most brutal though.
I love him.
Yeah, me too. He has a new movie coming out this year, actually. So, and it's not supposed to be as brutal as all that, from what I've heard. All right, all that to come. Many things, many thrillers. Wow, so many thrillers coming between now and Halloween. The new Halloween movie is coming next month. I'll be reviewing that. And I'm sure you guys will be watching it because Carlos is going to drag you to the theater to see that Halloween Ends movie.
No, he said we could watch it downstairs in the giant screen.
It's on, it's going to be in theaters, but it will be on Peacock at the same time. You're absolutely right. So you can.
And we have Peacock.
There you go. Oh, by the way, if you have Peacock, or if you don't, anybody out there, Peacock right now, with the release of the Jurassic Park movie that just came out and premiered on Peacock, they have a director's cut of that as well, if you guys want to catch that. But more importantly, you can get Peacock for the entire year for $24. So it costs $2 a month if you guys want. If you don't have Peacock, you guys can subscribe for $24 for the entire year, which is kind of a deal. You know, there's some good stuff on there. And maybe I'll have a recommendation.
Yellowstone.
Oh, Yellowstone. That's another show I have not caught up on. I have not caught up on.
It is very long.
Yeah.
It's very pretty. Very pretty. Kevin Costner. Great job. Anyway, moving on.
It's very confusing. Yellowstone is on Peacock. Everything else is on Paramount Plus.
The spinoff is great of the time before. I forget what the date is, but it's supposed to be before Yellowstone. And they have the coolest outfits. Yeah.
All right, cool. I got to go have some dinner.
Go have dinner.
And you have a good week. And we'll check in probably later this week, and we will talk about some new thrillers. We'll talk about Barbarian, and we'll talk about Goodnight Mommy, the remake, and the original.
Send me all this info in a text thing.
Will do. I'll get you. I'll give you your list. Well, you've already seen Barbarian, so you're done with that. You just have to watch Goodnight Mommy.
Yep, done with that.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Bye.